Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today we have the author Arthur George with us. Hi, Arthur.
Hello. Glad to be here.
So, Arthur, today we'd like to discuss the mythology around New Year's. Looking at the cover of your book, why are the book subtitle and the cover illustration The Dance of the Horay?
Because there's there's a lot of mythology underlying a lot of our holidays, and the holidays that turned out to be the most mythological in nature are those which relate to the passing of the seasons, not other holidays like 4th of July or Mother's Day or whatever. It's the ones that go back to the ancient and medieval seasonal holidays. And those myths and the way the holidays are celebrated evolve over time. And I thought that, in studying the Greek mythology relating to holidays, I saw that in action, this process of evolution, because the Greeks had this triad of the trinity, if you will, of goddesses. And the three of them were originally associated with the agricultural cycle, because in archaic Greece, you didn't have the urbanized polis yet. It was more of an agricultural society, and therefore the gods and goddesses related to the agricultural society cycle, just like Mars in Rome was originally an agricultural god, not a war god. So originally the three goddesses were Thalo, which means blossoming, like in the spring, and then Oxo, which is growth, the growing season, and then Carpo, which means fruit, or is associated with the harvest. So it's the phases of the growing season. But then when Greek culture became urbanized, the goddesses evolved into more sort of conceptual figures representing principles of philosophy or law or something like this. And this pertained more to urban life, and the agricultural aspects were more or less forgotten. And so their names even changed. You had eunomia, which means good governance, okay, a legal concept. Irene, which means peace. And the third one is dike, which means justice. So these are more sophisticated urban philosophical concepts and names associated, but they're still known as the Horay. So it illustrates how the holidays evolve, because there were holidays associated with the goddesses, of course, as well. So I thought I would pick up on that in the title, just to illustrate the idea that the seasonal holidays evolve over time.
So what is mythological about New Year's Day?
It's a time of transformation, a transformation from the old to the new, which is always a time of opportunities as well as dangers. It's a kind of liminal time, kind of a twilight in between period. And that being of that nature, that's when supernatural beings become active. And they can be good or bad. And so the good ones can be venerated, and the bad ones can be placated. And so whenever you get supernatural beings active and doing things, you're going to get mythology developing from that. And there's an astronomical aspect to this, because it's a yearly cycle. So it has to do with heaven and the whole cosmos, if you will. And so this transformation from the old to the new has cosmic implications. You get New Year's being associated with creation, and therefore with some creation myths. And sometimes literally, like in Babylon, ancient Babylon, the New Year's was literally conceptualized as a recreation of the cosmos, and the rituals follow that. So we can get it more into detail in the creation myths if you want, but that's the basic idea.
Yes, if you could go into a bit more detail on the creation myths associated with the New Year.
Yeah, well, whenever there's a recreation, you throw out the old and you start with the new. And you see that in the biblical flood story, actually. This is a really good example of that, where Earth, the cosmos was created, mankind was created, animals, the moon, the sun, star, everything. And at some point, things started going downhill. And Yahweh was fed up, and he brought the flood upon not only on man, but on the entire cosmos. And creation myths are almost always thought of in terms of the creation of order out of chaos. So there's always this primordial state or substance, which was known as chaos. And creation means putting that into order, and is usually a god that does that. And so you get multiplicity, different kinds of animals, two sexes, lots of different kinds of opposites come into being, and it all becomes order. And so in the biblical flood, the flood represents the return of chaos. Okay, and chaos in the ancient Near East was thought of in terms of a watery substance, water or a watery substance. So the flood fits right into that. And so the old is wiped away entirely, except for Noah and his ark, which is like a little bubble in the middle of all this chaos. And then the flood goes away. Noah sacrifices, God blesses him again, and things are able to start anew. And that's kind of the way the ancient people thought of New Year's, as getting rid of all the chaos that had built up over the prior year. You just throw all that stuff out, and there are rituals accompanying that. So you have all these purification rituals to clean things up, so you can be ready for the new year and get it off to a untainted beginning. And so you see this in a lot of the purification rituals in Greece and Rome, for example, where there are several holidays, one after another, over a period of 2 or more months leading up to the new year, each of which is designed to clean things up in preparation for the new year.
So how did we and other cultures decide when the new year begins, and what variations are there?
Yeah, you can take different approaches. First of all, I mean, we used to use originally a lunar calendar, which obviously didn't work for this purpose. So once people got into agriculture and agricultural cycle, you move to a solar cycle, and that naturally will lead to a kind of astronomical approach to when you start the new year. And so that could be on a solstice or an equinox, but the more common one is on the winter solstice, because that's when the sun is being reborn, right? And so things are going to get better, things are new again. And so, for example, the Incas, for example, in Peru, they use the winter solstice as their new year, which of course for them, being in the southern hemisphere, was in June. So that's one example of that. Another approach to deciding when the new year occurs is using an annual cycle of human activities. And in agricultural times, that was always based on the agricultural cycle. So that meant that your New Year fell either into the spring when you were sowing the crops, or at the end of the agricultural cycle when you're harvesting the crops, or even processing them. For example, in Israel, this is before biblical Israel, is more like in Canaan. The New Year was after the harvest of the grapes and the olives, and when the new wine was ready to drink. And so that would be like in September, early October maybe, and you would have a celebration, and it was quite festive because everybody was drinking the new wine, and it lasted a week. Alternatively, you can do it during the planting season, like I mentioned, and that's what happened in Babylon. It was in the March period. And then in Rome, the New Year started in ancient Rome, before the Julian calendar, or even a little before that. Spring started and the New Year started on March 1st. So that's when you're getting ready to plant the crops and send the animals out to pasture. And then in Egypt, you had a kind of a variation on that. It wasn't so much human activity, but human activity in response to natural phenomena, which in Egypt's case was the flooding of the Nile, which starts in June and usually ends in like September. So the New Year was in the middle of the summer when the flooding was at its height.
So how are supernatural beings associated with the New Year?
Well, you can have a God bringing things into order, like Yahweh did with Noah's flood, kind of thing. That's kind of the concept behind New Year, rather than the actual dating of it. Otherwise, the supernatural beings are usually lower beings associated with chaos, because people are afraid of them, and so there are all these rituals designed to placate them and chase them away. That's pretty much it. There's these creator gods that manipulate things on the one hand, and then there are the evil spirits or evil deities on the other.
Are there common archetypal patterns in New Year celebration rituals that varies from culture to culture?
Yeah, there are. And they have to do with the cycles that I mentioned earlier. They usually have to do with eliminating the chaos before the New Year comes, and with purifying the society and the land. So you do things like cleaning up the temples and other sacred areas. You'll clean off the statues of the deities. Okay, like you did that in Babylon, and in Athens, you would clean up a statue of Athena and carry it down to the sea, clean it, and then bring it back to the temple. You use fire a lot because fire is a cleansing agent. So there are a lot of fire cleansing rituals, and also incense for that purpose. It's the same kind of idea. You conduct sacrifices, of course, to placate the deities. Sometimes you'll have scapegoat rituals, so that the scapegoat carries away all the evil from the city or the people. I mean, we had that happened in ancient Greece, and as well, of course, the Jewish scapegoat ritual. Sometimes you would smear doors of houses or of temples with apotropaic substances designed to ward off evil or evil spirits. And then also making noise, clanging things, metal objects, clanging them together to raise a din, and that was thought to chase away the evil spirits as well. So once you've done all these preparatory purification rituals, then when the new year does come, you can celebrate. And that's when you have a party.
So speaking of parties and making noise, what are the mythical roots of our contemporary New Year's traditions, such as making noise and getting drunk and New Year's resolutions?
Yeah. Well, the noisemakers, we have noisemakers at New Year's, of course, and that derives from the tradition that I just mentioned of using noisy objects to drive away the evil spirits. So nobody thinks about that when they're doing that these days, but that's where it comes from. And then drunkenness is a kind of chaos, or at least transition from chaos into order. So New Year's Eve drunkenness is kind of associated with what the older people would call chaos. And then one thing I didn't mention before is one kind of archetypal aspect of New Year's is that since it was a change from the old year to the new year, augury was important. Fortune telling, foretelling the future was really important. And so in ancient times, you would get these augurs to tell you what was going to happen, right? Well, people don't believe so much that anymore. So rather than have other people tell you what the future is going to be and what's going to happen, you take matters into your own hands and make your own resolution about what you're going to do and what's going to happen to you, because you have control over it, which I think is a better idea. But it comes from the original telling of the future in ancient times. And then we have football games. We actually have that in New Year's, but we also have it like on Thanksgiving, and there used to be sport competitions on May Day as well. And those periods were transitions. Thanksgiving used to be the, in America, Thanksgiving used to be the day when you went from one season to the other, because we didn't celebrate Christmas originally. It wasn't popular in the United States. And it was already snowy by then in the old days. So anyway, in these celebrations, you would often get contests between people or opposing teams. And one was always associated with what was desired or good, and another one was what was being defeated. So in the case of May Day, winter was ending and summer was coming, okay? And in the Celtic culture, actually, a lot of people think that the Celts divided the year not into a 12-month period, but into 2 6-month periods. So you would actually have 2 New Years in a 12-month cycle, and May Day being one of them, and the other being in the fall on November 1st. And so one of the teams would represent winter, the other one summer, and the summer was supposed to prevail. And you had also figures representing summer. So there are these goddesses of winter and summer, and the summer goddess would always defeat the winter. And in Samhain, on the November 1st holiday, which was New Year, okay, pork was the main dish for the feast. And after they slaughtered the animal, they would take the bladders of the pigs and make them into balls. And that was what was used in the sporting event, which is how we got pigskin in American football. You don't have that in European football, but in America, American football, it's called a pigskin, and it's made out of pigskin, and that's where it comes from.
Arthur George, thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year to you. Thanks for having me.